there's two answers to that. One is nobody, and the other one is everybody, including everybody, including my mom and every single person that's ever crossed my life. But I understand what you're saying. But I think there's a lot of weight put on that question sometimes. And certainly every writer's different and approaches the idea of influence or inspiration in a different way. I guess my greatest influence, first of all, would have to be Campbell McGrath. He is still the little voice in my head. He's the only professor I had in the graduate program at FIU, because back then there was only one poet. So he's ingrained in my neurons there. There's been further to that Sandra Castillo, who works for Miami-Dade College, and she was very important in that development. And going all the way back to Miami-Dade Community College, back in the North Campus, when I first took my first creative writing course, just out of curiosity, which was Mrs. Washington. So I think my teachers, and on the one level, have been great mentors, and not just because, obviously, of what they taught me to read or how to read, but because of who they were as human beings, and that has opened up different possibilities and ways for me to see the world and others, and that therefore created different possibilities for my poetry that would not otherwise be there. As far as mentors from afar, as far as other writers and stuff, there's interesting, a lot of people sort of, when they ask me that, they expect me to mouth off a list of every Latino or Latin American author that has ever existed. And they're often surprised when they realize that my influences aren't just exclusively Latin American or Latino poets. One important one being Sandra Cisneros, who first gave me permission to write my story by reading her work. I thought, oh, I don't have to write about daffodils and sailboats and the daffodils in Miami, like there are any. But I see the Sears influence just good work, or work that speaks to you. And often people ask me, what should I be reading? And my answer is, whatever is turning you on is what you should be reading. Don't let anybody tell you, well, if you're, a Colombian American poet, you should be reading, X poets. It's like, no, just read whatever is speaking to you. And so I read whatever turns me on, and the influences come from, I read a lot of psycho-spiritual books. I'm fascinated by psychology. I read a lot of science books. I'm fascinated. That to me inspires me as much as a poem, and actually creates new connections in my head that sometimes diving into an entire body of work by one poet will not do. So I just want to put that out there. Inspiration is one thing, and influence is another. Our inspirations come from everywhere and everything. That being said, there are some poets that have weighed in more than others. But I've never been a fan of, let's face it, every poet writes really bad poems also. So to me, it's not about one particular poet, but about a poem. A masterpiece can teach you something all your life, about writing, about yourself, about the world, about everything. And there are masterpieces in my life that I still read to this day, one being the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, which is in the memoir. That poem still teaches me things about poetry that or reminds me of things I've forgotten, or new things I never knew I could even know. Elizabeth Bishop is an unexpected surprise too. Here's a, New Englander, whatnot. But to me, Elizabeth Bishop and I are closer, in a sense, than any Latin American poet, in the sense of exile. In a way, even though you think she's rooted in Americanness, she was effectively psychologically in exile all her life. She was orphaned when she was 4 years old, effectively orphaned because her mother was locked up in an asylum. And so I see in her this quest for home, and this idea of trying to connect to place the physical landscape as well as the emotional landscape all her life. And she lived in Brazil for 30 years, lived in Key West. She even lived in North Haven off the coast of Maine. And I find psychologically that my parallel with her more than sort of any other author in some way that I can't exactly explain. And then, of course, in terms of craft, she's influenced me. But I'm not sure which came first, the chicken or the egg. Are you influenced by someone because you identify them with their psychology and their concerns and then admire their craft, or vice versa, or simultaneously? So her reliance on imagery and let the images tell the story, her reliance on that lushness of detail, that insistence on detail, to me is something that's great. But Campbell writes like that too in amazing ways.